thing to fight for natural law, but you got to actually trust it also in order to get other people to trust it around you.
We have done a very poor job in presenting the case for liberty.
I think I am really interested in asking about your take on the Federal Reserve.
This argument has been going on since the country started because Hamilton wanted it and Jefferson did not want it.
I think, again, like what the economists are all missing is this fundamental understanding of natural law.
The bankers come in and they write the regulations. So it's the corruption in government that is the problem.
This is a concept that I don't think many people can really conceptualize.
People hear the truth and get their liberties back, they'll be much more interested in what we're talking about.
I'm Nicole Shanahan, Bobby Kennedy's running mate. Welcome to Back to the People podcast, which highlights the growth of a movement uniting America, where our government is free from corporate capture and where we give voice back to the American public. Dr. Ron Paul, thank you for coming on my podcast, Back to the People. I've enjoyed the conversations we've had, and I'm so excited for the opportunity to interview you. Thank you for coming on.
Well, it's great to be with you.
Well, you know, I was just saying before we got rolling that you really don't understand what's going on in this country until you run for office. And when you run for office, and, you know, clearly when you serve in office, there's this whole new perspective that an individual gets about all of these different forces at play in our country. And trying to understand the pockets where people are aligned, their political leanings, the goals that they have, the lobbies that they represent. It's really been an education for me. You have been doing this for so long, and I just can't imagine the intellectual range that you have developed trying to reconcile all of these people and players and forces, outside forces coming into this country. And you somehow have coalesced all of this knowledge into a very, very clear framework for how you think about liberty and how you prioritize what is most important for this country. And the amount of respect I have for you has grown significantly over the last few months as I have built my own framework at looking at politics and priorities for this country. And, you know, the first question I have for you is, you have said before that truth is treason in the empire of lies. When did this become clear to you that truth was under attack in this country? When did you have your awakening that people were lying?
Well, it wasn't all at one time, and I remember the moment, but I do write about and talk about, and I had a lot of influence the 1960s because I was still in my medical training when I was drafted, and that was during the Cuban crisis and Vietnam was going on. And I was at the Kelly Air Force Base where Kennedy was the day before, and I had minor responsibilities for him passing through. But then I was fascinated to keep up with, the lies and the stories told about Kennedy being assassinated. And then when Robert Kennedy was assassinated and Martin Luther King was assassinated, there was a lot of lying goes on. But it dawned on me somewhere along the way that lying can be systematic. Some people believe in it. Mm-hmm. They say, you people who believe that you should tell the truth, you don't know what the truth is, and they have no concept or no interest in trying to understand natural law. Some things all the way back to thousands of years ago, it was very well known that natural law meant you knew right and wrong, that shooting and killing and robbing people was wrong. But we have a large segment in this country that are nihilists, and some people, believe it in a say a philosophically positive way, they get distraught. So that dawned on me, and it came out of me looking at the assassinations of the 1960s. And the other thing, on a political basis, they say, how did you ever go up to Washington and put up that with that stuff?
Yeah.
And my answer was, and it was an honest answer, but it's not a very good political answer. I said I had real low expectations. I didn't build myself up that I was going to go to Congress, and I was interested in monetary policy. I was surprised I won the election and went to Congress, but I didn't go there with the idea, boy, I could do the world a lot of good if I could become chairman of the Federal Reserve. So I protect myself about any of those disappointments, and I see a mission, I see a responsibility, but it's a little bit different than the average person running for office, because if they actually believe it, that's one thing, or if they just use that as a vehicle to get, prestige and money, that's a different story, and that's what most of Congress is made up of.
That's a really interesting something that you foundationally had to believe in order to start this journey, knowing what you were going into. Is that the framework that you still use because you've kept coming back? You've been coming back to politics year after year. You've run for president 3 times. You've held so many terms in Congress. Let me just 1976 to 77, 79 to 85, 97 to 2013. So you've come back time and time again with you said you have to have low expectations, but you have to have something else too. And that is the belief that maybe you can send a ripple effect, right? I mean, that's my assumption, but I'd love to hear from you. You go in with low expectations, but you also go in with something else, I have to imagine, right?
Well, I don't predict what I can do and will do, and I don't get involved in that. But there is a message and understanding, and one economist and philosopher, Leonard Read, influenced me. He says your responsibility, because I became interested under his reign at Feed Foundation, and he said that if I'm interested in it. You need to study and read and understand the message, and people will come to you eventually. So I was not, presenting myself as becoming the Speaker of the House or the Chairman of the committee. My message was always 100%. My goal was to send out a message which I still believe in, and I still think it existed all the way back to the Roman times, and even before that. I think natural law is something very natural, and that people knew about that, but they reject it. And so I see the whole world as a contest between, nihilism and lying, and the lying and the cheating and the stealing, with the higher law, the natural law. I believe strongly in that, and then everybody, why we who believe that get written off is it invites people thinking, well, that sounds like a religion or something like that. It could exist with a religion, but it's not a religious in that sense. That's for those who reject it because it sounds religious. But a lot of the great religions, and maybe all of them, have some bits of reference to natural law.
Mm-hmm.
At least the effort and the sentiments to that exist. So I see the world as a contest that's been going on for 6,000-7,000 ever since they started writing books. This contest has been going on, and I think it's going to continue to go on. I find it fascinating. I think it's very important. I think that's what life is all about, and I get personal gratification from it because I like it. I like to meet the people, and people that want to ask serious questions. So I do it, and I tell my audiences when I speak to large groups is doing this, I'm going to talk about all the terrible things going on, and you got to prepare.
Yeah.
I said, but you better have some fun talking about it, and there's no reason why we can't have fun doing that when we associate with like-minded people, and I look at it as a very positive thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good to hear that you've been able to keep a lightness inside of you as you confront these very big nihilistic challenges we face. And when I ventured onto the ticket with Bobby Kennedy, he looked over at me and he said, "All right, let's have some fun with this." It's been, for me, I'm a 38-year-old woman. I'm a mom with a young child. I'm not done trying to grow my family. And I'm looking at this world and I can't help but look at this job through the lens of a mother. And, talking about natural law, I read you've delivered thousands of babies. You're an obstetrician. And, I can't help but think there's got to be a real connection between seeing life enter this world, the preciousness, the magic of it, and how you have incorporated and folded in natural law into your guiding light. It's your guiding principle. And I find that it makes this work so much more obvious. It makes how you should be looking at these very technical issues, such as even constitutional liberties and how to interpret the Constitution in the age of 2024. But if you go to the foundations of natural law as it relates to mother and child, something that you've seen time and time again, that magic moment, those first moments of that child taking a first breath, to that moment of connecting onto, the chest of the mother. And I mean, I've got to believe there's some important connection there that has uniquely situated you to have such incredible longevity with this message that has beaten and bashed, and you've been insulted, and but you have risen above all of it. And I've got to believe it's because you've seen the magic of life time and time again.
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with it one way or the other because it has influenced me, and I still marvel as the years go on. I still marvel at the magnificence of the human body.
Yeah.
When you think about there's some great computers out there, and I don't even understand a lot of it, but I tell you what, if you're looking for synapses and integration of information, the human brain is just unbelievable. So over the years, the human body has had a big impression with me. But I can remember when I made a decision. I was in medical school, but I didn't know what specialty I was in. So I was at internal medicine when I was drafted, and then I was in the Air Force. But I can remember in one of my internships, I was in general medicine, and a lot of people were very, very sick, and there were good doctors and nurses and doing a good job, and I marveled at that. But I didn't have, it was sort of a selfish feeling, and I can't do all this. This is so sad.
Mm-hmm.
And then I heard somebody talk, and they say, in OB, the OB is responsible that when a patient comes to the hospital, they go home with something.
Yeah.
And the best you can do if somebody comes in sick is make them healthy, and we need that too, because that's very, very important. But for me, psychologically and mentally, it was a statement that stuck with me, and there's an association with doctor and patient. I think we're losing it to a degree. Medicine is changing; it's coming bureaucratic. But my daughter is an OB doctor, and she has 6 kids, and she went through all medical school and all residency, raising kids, and she's probably catching up to me on how many babies she's delivered because she has adapted to this wonderfulness of delivering a new life, and that's when I don't know how people can avoid thinking about the natural law and thinking, oh, well, where do babies come from? Well, they drop out of the sky,
Yeah.
that's it. So, no, the fact of human life is very, very important, and subtly in many ways that has influenced me.
Yeah. So I come, I'm in Silicon Valley where this transhumanism is happening right in front of my eyes every single day. I have founders of these breakthrough companies that are figuring out how to grow humans out of skin stem cells and grow humans in artificial wombs. And I will say that that ethos has translated into how we think about motherhood and childbirth already in this area. We have one of the highest rates of scheduled C-sections. There's only a handful of midwives left in the area. Pretty much most babies are IVF babies at this point. And, there's all these things that are happening to change how we think about natural law. And it's influencing people's relationships, I think, with how we think about humans. And I can feel it. I mean, I see it, I feel it. A lot of it's based around fear and this desire to control the unknown. And we've lost the wisdom. Here in Silicon Valley, I think that there's this void that has been created where the wisdom around trusting natural law, because it's one thing to fight for natural law, but you got to actually trust it also in order to get other people to trust it around you. And natural law is really a community effort. And I'm on this journey where I'm trying to remind people the intrinsic value of humanness and the intrinsic intelligence in nature. And I'm finding it harder and harder to find audiences open to that conversation. What are your theories around? I mean, you've actually already so beautifully stated it that there's this subtle influence that happens when you accept natural law as a guiding principle. And it's allowed you to see very clearly how to fix some of the biggest issues in this country, but also how to sustain and build a movement.
Yes, and I think one thing that I sort of add on to it, although it's very natural to do so, is that natural law is very important. And Cicero said that if you don't follow natural law, it's amazing what that man wrote about and spoke about. Because if you don't, he said, if you don't follow natural law, you're a tyrant. Because this is natural law gives us the answers, and it is, and to me, it fits into my libertarian beliefs that the natural law means you shouldn't be killing people, that you shouldn't commit aggression. So that fits into the political ideas that I have, and yet what is it? What happens is there just a vacuum out there? No, you play on the idea of positive ideas, and what we end up using to blend in with natural law is volunteerism. You spoke of working together on this sort of thing, and it's been very natural throughout all history for people to come together as groups. And the first groups there were families, maybe a couple people, then families, and that grew over the many centuries. And I think that is volunteerism. I love to use that word because it solves problems. Just think if everything we did both sides had to agree with in social associations. If nobody's breaking the law of nonviolence, then it's okay. You volunteer. You could be socially religiously. You could do it economically. Oh, that's too much. Oh, look, you'd be gouged. The unions will rip you off, and the companies will gouge. And well, maybe they need to have an understanding of natural law because they shouldn't be doing that. But voluntarism, it's hard for a person that disagrees with what we're talking about and saying, "Well, you guys are over the top." And push them on volunteerism. What's wrong with two people talking to each other and they want to have an association? Still, one of the most important things in free market economics is the contract.
Mm-hmm.
The contract is important, and there can be some legal controls of that. But on day-to-day activities where you don't have a written contract, people do know that volunteerism. Matter of fact, almost everything we do we make choices and they're voluntary. Where you do, what store you go into, what you buy, who you talk to, and all this is all voluntary. And that solves the problem of a lot of things created by people who choose to reject the idea of natural law. And as Cicero said, if you will refuse to look at natural law, you will become a tyrant. And we have too many tyrants around now telling us what medications to take and what
Yeah.
medicine the government's control of the medicine, and it's just an outrage because they took away the voluntarism. The government tells us what to do and what we're allowed to do. Somebody says, well, yeah, but some patients and some people, if they have their own choice, they're going to do dumb things. Maybe that is true. But what do you want to? Why would you pick them up and put them in the government to do it to everybody? Just think of lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, because somebody, you should be able to voluntarily practice whatever you need when there are threats like that. But to put it in the hands of tyrants that they don't even believe in natural law, invites what we're facing today, and it's the bankruptcy, financial bankruptcy it leads to, and it leads to a moral bankruptcy, and that's what we're facing. But we're also facing the conclusion of it because it doesn't last forever. Societies and empires come and go, and I think why we're in a turmoil right now, which I think is going to get worse, is the fact that we're facing a bankruptcy that we're in denial of, and it turns into, well, what we need is more democracy. Well, that's the opposite. Their ideas of the democracy that they're talking about is the opposite of voluntarism. So I vote for voluntarism.
Interesting. Well, volunteerism, I think, will seed this new era. And I agree with you that there's this post-World War II culture that is winding down right now, which is why we feel such chaos. And there's this gap of the Clinton Bush era is winding down, and there's been this vacuum that has been needed to be filled. Donald Trump has somehow filled it, and he's filled it for the time being. His style is very different, but it is he has paved this new way of thinking about politics. It rings of populism. There's bits and rings of volunteerism, but he's still trying to fit into the mold of the RNC, and he's still trying to fit into the mold of this two-party system. But I think as a millennial, there's this opportunity. There's this huge gap in front of us where the leaders, the post-World War II style leadership is waning. They're trying to keep it going, but it's just not available anymore. This idea of the United States having this moral authority to police the rest of the world, that's just not the case anymore. And us young people see it, we feel it. But we don't know how to step into it and what values to step into in this moment. And there aren't that many great examples. You're one of the few examples of, I think, the kind of thought leadership young people want right now. They want a sense of liberty. They want abundance. They want to know that we're taking care of our home front first. And volunteerism is something that sounds just great. I don't think a single young person today will hear about volunteerism and say, I don't want that. Every single person who hears it will want it. And if it means that there's less friction to get our basic needs met, that's something we would all sign up for. So what are the mechanics of volunteerism? How would you dream up a election opportunity in let's not talk about 2024. We know what 2024 looks like. It's a wild, bumpy ride to November. But let's talk about 2028.
It has to be offered to people, but the reason why we hit a brick wall is people see that as they're going to lose their benefits. The military. As I was going to Congress, I thought welfare was those poor people who just want food stamps. Well, my attitude changed real fast because I thought the big welfare came from the big companies. And when I learned about the pharmaceutical industrial complex and the media industrial complex, the military industrial complex, so. And you talk about volunteerism, that is the opposite of what we're doing. And here we just changed the rules seductively to say that everybody's automatically registered to go to war. And there's not even going to be a vote on it. And I make fun of that when I said, young people that fight and die, they're not the ones that start the war. It's these special interests that starts the wars. So I said, I make fun by saying, well, what do you think a bunch of 20-year-olds, 22-year-old young people get together from one country and go to another country and talk to them, and to an age group of another country and say, you know what, life is boring. Why don't we have a war? Let's start a war. But no, that's the way it would be involuntary. That's not what happened. The argument should be philosophic and not that. But one thing, Nicole, that we should think about, and why I come across as the optimist, is the people that you talk about. What do you do? How do you reach people? And they're out there. That was the conclusion I had when I did my campaigns, because some of the most liberal universities I went to, we had large crowds, and I'd tell them it's bad news, and then I would tell them, that things aren't that bad because we have answers for that. And the answer, are economic answers, the principles of liberty and these sort of things. So that I think the numbers of people out there are there just begging for the message. At the same time, the people who are in control, and this has been very deliberate, and that has been after the coup that I talk about that's gone on for 100 years, and that has been the taking over our educational system, our medical system, and the media in particular. They control things, but they're small. They're just powerful. They're tyrants because they don't even believe in truth. They believe they're telling the truth, and that's their responsibility. And young people responded very, very well to that. They understood that. The other thing that I thought they would probably boo me for, but they were equally enthusiastic. I said, under our system, you're not going to have income tax, and you're not going to have this. You can make your choices on your friends, your choices on what you can make your choice on what you smoke and drink and all that. But you have the responsibility of everything that you do, and you can't ever commit violence. And if things go well for your plans, you can't go crying to your neighbors and say, you take care of me, and send your congressman there. And, they responded well about the responsibility argument because the freedom argument overwhelmed them. You mean I wouldn't have to do this and no draft? And we have done a very poor job in presenting the case for liberty, and I work on it every single day on how I can formulate, this story, the scenario of how wonderful, liberty is, and it's been tested. We've had a pretty good test in the early years of this country, but it's a shame to see it fading away I mean, and I sure you sort of expressed the same concern. What's this going to lead to? What's going to lead to trouble? Because when you run this up, if you're running up a moral debt and a financial debt, the debt will be liquidated, and that's what's going through. And there's all this hesitation, and that it has to be liquidated one way or the other, and then the restoration of the natural law has to occur. But we're up. It's up for choice right now, and we should know what it is. But we shouldn't be discouraged because there's a lot of people waiting for that message.
Yeah, I completely see what you're seeing, and there's something very powerful and unique right now to the fact that our debt is being finally called. We will be held accountable to it, and nobody has an answer to what comes next. And if what comes next is natural law and volunteerism being the guiding light of our path forward, and we have a way to talk about it, we have a way to describe what that looks like, we have a way to empower the individual to feel like they can thrive still in a moment of great distress for our federal government now being lost in its both moral and financial debt. I mean, I could take my next question in two directions, but I think I am really interested in asking about your take on the Federal Reserve, because I've done my research and in ending the Fed, and it looks really scary. I won't lie. What ending the Fed looks like. I don't know that I have the confidence in, certainly audit the Fed. I'm ready to audit the Fed. Let's do that. But ending the Fed sounds. I don't have the tool chest to end the Fed, and I'm wondering if you can help point me to a few resources that would give me the confidence to end the Fed.
Read a lot, whatever you can find by Murray Rothbard.
Okay.
You can get all those books from the Mises Institute. No, we didn't have the Fed before 1913. This argument has been going on since the country started because Hamilton wanted it and Jefferson did not want it, and it's unnecessary. I look at it in a moral way because what we're doing, we have a system of money which is immoral. A secret body of men get together and decide how much it's worth and what the interest rates would be. It's total distortion of the whole process, and it's counterfeit. If the government was involved, and originally the Treasury, but we didn't have a central bank because they knew the history that it will always become corrupt because they would be allowed to counterfeit legally. Then when we got control of the central bank of the world, and we had all the money and all the gold and all the resources, we had license to steal, and we became the biggest counterfeiter in the world. But right now, there's a resistance to it. It was destined to come. So to me, it's a moral issue. Nobody has the right to counterfeit. They understand. I tell people, what if I was given the printing press of the government? I could create the exact thing that is out in circulation. That wouldn't make it right. So, but the Federal Reserve does that, and that is the reason government gets out of control. That you can't have these wars without the Fed. I mean, just think of these last 2 years.
Yeah.
How much money, how much debt have we run up? And they're still trusting the dollar, but less so. And that it finances the wars. It finances the welfare for the wealthy and the people, and all this nonsense and government. So you cannot stop the monstrosity we have with secret and powerful legalized counterfeiting, because human nature is they don't believe in natural law. Natural law seems like they might use something of real value.
What I heard you just say right now is that some of the biggest atrocities happening across the world are due to the fact that we have invented a counterfeit system of currency that allows these players, these deeply nihilistic players, to have unrestricted access to financial resources. And it's interesting because I have lived a life here in the United States where I've had no money. I grew up very, very poor. We were on food stamps for a few years, and medical government assistance, and just a few years, but we got off of it as fast as we could. And I lived a very creative life as a result, a life of passion, but a life of morals, because when you have limited resources, you have to draw on other things to get by. And those other things are principles. Those other things are being responsible with one's bank account. I could tell you down to $1.50 how much I had in my bank account up until a few years ago. And then, at some point in my life, I lived as one of the wealthiest women on the planet. I married the co-founder of Google. I looked into my bank account and there were so many digits. And I will say there is a psychology that happens when you have unrestricted access to resources. It's not a good psychology. And when you don't have a plan for those resources guided by some higher principle. And I tried to bring in that higher principle. I said, okay, I'm going to help people. And as a private citizen, I then went about that. And then I realized that the institutions in play had so many other layers and areas of corruption and influence. And that when you have these powerful pockets of influence, they can become corrupted by these outside powers as well. And it becomes very chaotic very quickly. And I had actually a really big issue around realizing I have a background in economics. I've been a very spiritual person my whole life. I've believed in God. I have relied on God to get me through some of my more challenging moments in life. And the amount of money that my family had made me psychologically disconnected from all of these other guiding principles that had guided me for the first 30 years of my life. And I'm wondering if that's what's happened to the psychology of the United States as well, in that when you can just print money, or you have a system that just prints money for you, you cannot actually see or prioritize the basic needs of the community around you.
I think that's very important because what we don't have, what I call the unit of account, because we don't have a sound currency, so contracts and promises and money changes, and as they distort it over many, many years and decades, the bigger the bubble is, and the more dangerous it is, and that's what we're facing. But the one thing is if you take everything I say at hand, boy, that's horrible. What are you going to do if I could, get rid of the Fed and cut the spending? But I think that would be chaotic and it wouldn't be accepted. And so I, in my mind, believe you can do it with a transition program. Although a purist would say no more welfare for anybody. No, I start off with the foreign policy of wars, the war monitoring, all this. Just think of how much goes to the Middle East, to Africa, China, Taiwan, and Ukraine, and all this stuff. And young people were attracted to this. Stop the wars, and don't do this. And you could work a way down. And I always would say, in a truly libertarian society, you don't have government taking care of the poor. The poor, there are less poor, and there's a lot of generosity. People are very generous.
They are.
But anyway, you would have a lot more, and the attitudes would change. But the attitude is that the people I would always preserve taking care of, I'm not going to attack child health care on top of the list when you think of what the pharmaceutical industries are doing and what military does. No, I used to say millions and billions of dollars. Now it's trillions of dollars. We're on the verge of the correction. The unit of account has to be there, and there is no unit of account morally, and there's no unit of account according to our money. So it is a big, big distraction, distortion, and people call bubbles, and they don't last. And that's why we have to prepare. But I'm optimistic because I think our efforts in the educational area through, like our Ron Paul Institute, for peace and prosperity. The Mises Institute has done a great job. And there are people out there. There are more now than there were when I went to college, I'll tell you that. And I think the field is fertile. It's just begging for it. But somebody with good ideas of getting that out and energizing people to go and participate. And as I said, when people ask me, what should I do? Do whatever you want to do.
Do what you want to do. I remember.
Do whatever you
Yeah.
do. So I think you can find something as long as you believe these few little laws. One law: don't hurt people and don't kill people. And if you have that law, you can go out and do whatever you want to. If you mess up your own life in this world that I'm describing, you're responsible.
Yeah.
For it. And if you can't do it, then we would look to families and friends and neighbors and churches. I think our country, even under these terrible conditions, there still will respond to the problems that people have. But these problems are going to get worse. Because when the correction comes, we can't stop the correction. The liquidation comes with runaway inflation, and that's been well written up. But it has to be liquidated, and then you can liquidate debt by printing money. But you can't. The moral thing is going to be a personal thing where people have to understand what the natural law is, and they could start by reading Cicero.
Reading Cicero, going way back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this idea that it is being liquidated by inflation, this is a concept that I don't think many people can really conceptualize. That, like, when your spending power becomes so weakened, why is it weakened? It's because of the liquidation of our debt, right? That's fundamentally what they're feeling at a household income level, is that the government now has changed the nature of what dollars can spend. And, I talk to economists every week and try to understand inflation, and they're like, well, it's really a supply issue. And I'm like, yeah, like, you could look at it as a strict supply issue, but, like, what is even controlling the supply? And, it all comes back to the power of what is able to produce that supply and for the market. And if the whole system at play of exchange and purchase power makes it so that supply is less available, then of course, what you can buy feels like less and less over time. But I think, again, like, what the economists are all missing is this fundamental understanding of natural law, and that if they could equate natural law into even the discussion of supply, economic supply, then it would actually give us tools for rectifying supply issues. But we don't really have those tools thinking through rectifying supply issues. Have you given that any thought on how natural law could be interpreted on supply chain shortages?
Well, we have to understand how that comes about and how pricing occurs. And you mentioned money, maybe the supply of money, which is pretty well understood, but they don't want to deal with it. Matter of fact, I think the assassinations of the 1960s had a lot to do with wanting to stop war and cut back on some of that spending. No, in Austrian economics, they have this principle called the subjective theory of value. If one says, well, okay, we're going to take care of the poor and we're going to fight these wars, we're going to double the money supply. somebody would say, well, if you double the money supply, that will devalue the currency and the value of the dollar will go down 50%. It doesn't work like that. Matter of fact, the worst thing is some people get many more benefits, and that is the banking industry, the people who receive the money first. The worst people have when this circulates around the poor people, the middle class, when they go to buy bread, that price of bread might double, but somebody else who cares about it. But the subjective theory of value is important because the money supply is very important, and that's why you want to get the Fed out of printing this money. But the subjective theory says that we place a value on things subjectively. If we want something, this desire, it's subjective, and subjectivity enters into it, and the money is very important, and ultimately they have to deal with that. But the subjective value of the value means that the value is what you determine it. If you have $100, I have $100. Who knows what we might spend it on? And it's something that you can't use a computer and calculate prices or anything or economic calculation. But that's the reason you have to have a unit of account that would iron these problems out with interest rates. You wouldn't have zero interest rates for several years. At the same time, we're looking forward to seeing, the first major economic issue was in the 70s when I got upset about closing the gold window. We had 21% interest rates. So here I've lived through times where it's 21% and zero. That's crazy, and it makes people make the wrong decision. And then when you have a decision here, it depends on what kind of car you want. That becomes subjective. I like this and I like that, and that affects prices. But that's not the inflation. The inflation comes from the devaluation of the money and the dollar, and we lose totally the concept of the unit of account. Everything now is still priced in dollars, no matter what you do and own. If you have a substitute, you say, well, what would my substitute cost? Well, what can I get for it in dollars? Mm-hmm. So we use the dollars, but it's fake and fictitious and controlled, and it's destined because nobody's quite willing to, sometimes we have a bill in Congress to cut 5 cents off every bill that we pass, and they voted down. They wouldn't even cut 5 cents off anything. No, the political process, everybody's involved, but I still say that if the people hear the truth and get their liberties back, they'll be much more interested in what we're talking about.
Yeah, it has me thinking about what's going on right now. And Netanyahu was here in the United States recently, speaking to Congress, and what the world media failed to see was that China was convening 14 groups representing Palestinian interests. He had put together this document called the Beijing Declaration. This is all happening in tandem with China trying to move the rest of the world off of the dollar. And so there's forces at play that are accelerating this, that everything you have said is going to happen. We didn't know exactly how it was going to happen, but I think it's very clear now exactly how it's happening, because it's happening right in front of our eyes.
Right.
The petrol dollar is moving away from the U.S. dollar. And that it's happening, whether or not we like it, whether or not our politicians want it, it's happening. It's happening right in front of us. And it's influencing the organization of geopolitics, and it's going to eventually influence every aspect of our lives as it relates to the value of our bank accounts and what those bank accounts can then purchase in even local markets. So getting people their liberty back, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. And I keep going back to basic resources. How much does a nature-grown, non-pesticide tomato full of all of the nutrients you would expect to be in tomato, how much does that cost? And how many people can access that? And then I think about clean water. How many people are actually getting clean water out of their taps? How many people are spending money on water that they deem to be a safer option? Um, how many people are able to get their kids a basic education? How many people can afford to put homes over their heads? And this last one is where Americans are really, really hurting right now. But I also see Americans really hurting right now accessing real food and clean water. So when we think about liberty, those to me are the calculations for liberty is housing and food.
Yeah, we spend a lot of money regulating, and we have wrote up the regulations. But we the problem, the more regulations we have, the bigger it gets. The people learn how to get around it, and everything you mentioned, I think you should say, well, we don't support that because it's an act of aggression. If they're selling us bad products or giving us bad water, and if it's political, if it's private, they're liable. But when the politician does it, they just sort of they cover themselves. It's sort of like when you have a problem in Washington and accusations and people getting killed, we'll have a commission and we're going to study it. Well,
Mm-hmm.
that's the cover up. It was bad policy to begin with, and then they go in and they cover up the people who made mistakes in government, and then they cover up, the whole principle of what's going on. So I would say that it still boils down to the misuse of government, but it doesn't mean that government wouldn't have that responsibility. I bet you could find out the more problems we have with water and different things probably has gotten worse with more regulations.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they had, the first regulation on banks, the bankers come in and they write the regulations. So it's the corruption in government that is the problem. So the lobbyists are way ahead of everybody. So, and I think that can happen in monetary issues and everything. That they, the when you have a system like we have, they will just control the people who are say we're doing good. We will follow those rules. We're going to give people a lot of food and the right kind of water. We're going to make sure that everybody's taken care of. Nobody's going to be living on the streets. It just look, we have more people in the streets than ever before because of this corruption in government and government can be limited. Does that mean you want anarchy? No, I want self-government. And I want people to, the government of volunteerism. That is, the market is pretty rough on if you mess up and you go bankrupt, you don't get bailed out. Today, no matter what happens, especially the big guys, if you get into trouble, we're going to have banking problems. And just recently, in recent decades, they get bailed out. So it's the people who run the show and are always doing you a lot of good. They're going to promise you, oh yeah, we're going to have a Bank Secrecy Act to protect your privacy, and all it does is destroy your privacy by saying that we have to have government to protect us. One danger is it's very tempting to yield to a government that says, I want to take care of you and I want to make you safe. No, you want to make people free. People know how to be safe.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big difference. But I want to be safe. And it's pretty hard for me to make that argument because that sounds like you don't care. I talked about police and the problems with the police, but I did it when the police were acting outside natural law. And they still do. They commit a lot of errors, but I really think you can limit it to if they're going to have violence or break the rules, whether they're in government or not. But why, if it's a human nature that there's a lot of people who are going to not obey natural law, why do we put them in charge of all of us? The people that believe that we have this obligation to fight every country in the world as long as we give them orders and instruction. If they do what we want, we reward them with money and special deals. If they don't do what we say, we bomb them. And we do it constantly. It doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't make any sense. Yeah, and I think it's really hard for the average American to still grasp that regulation is making everybody sicker, and that if you look at the trends, regulation has been guided not by the principles of safety, which they say that they're being guided by the principles of safety, but oftentimes they're being guided by the principles of lobbyists and lobbyists and special interests. And so long as we have that system, we really cannot trust our regulators to do the right thing. And I'm seeing that in California. It's devastating. It's mind boggling. It's absolute insanity in how they're managing water in my state. It strikes me that the people at the top making these decisions are so far removed from this idea of being a true moral and ethics leader. They don't behave that way anymore. In fact, many of them don't even think that the positions that they're in enable them to do the right thing. And that's to me the telltale signs of absolute governance failure. And so, I do think that we have to remove the regulators for a time being because, like you said, people who are free know how to be safe. They understand what that looks like.
But we shouldn't say that we're going to get rid of regulations. Private companies have regulated products all along. They have people inspecting these things and they basically do a good job. It's the bureaucrat that will reward lobbyists is the problem. But regulations can be very voluntary, and there'll be more private groups coming and helping us sort out because I'm very interested in what kind of bread I eat. But I want more help sometimes, even though I'm a physician. I want to make sure what's in the bread. And there's, and the government, I don't want to depend on the government to tell me exactly, oh, this product is safe, but not this other one. No, the regulations would be there, but I think they'd be a lot smarter.
That's a good point. So it's okay. So it's not about removing regulation in and of itself. It's about determining who gets to regulate.
There, that's it.
Okay. And right now we have disconnected bureaucrats connected to lobbyists that are regulating. What we really need are the people who are being regulated to self-regulate. And I see this actually. I see this amongst especially farmers here in the state of California because right now farmers are being regulated by these departments that are run by bureaucrats that are influenced by lobbyists. But they have all of the answers for what good regulation could and should and ought to be, but they're not empowered to do that. So if we then say, okay, we're going to, at the department level, we're going to assign regulatory authority to the constituents that are being regulated because they understand the mechanics of safe and good regulation, that is where we're going to then, you know, install it. But that, this structure of the bureaucrats still holding that power seems problematic to me because that then says, well, I'm going to trust you to be informed by the right people. And that trust structure doesn't exist. It's been completely disconnected. So how do we get the governed and the regulated to do the regulating? Do we uninstall the bureaucrats and bring these people up? Where is how do we move around the power structure?
Well, you got to get away from the people who are doing it for the money and the power. And that's where we are now as a consequence of what we've been doing for so long. But no, to make people more moral is not an easy job. But I think when you allow government, if we put the immoral people into government, then we're asking for more trouble. So it really does basically go down, to what the founder said. If we're not a moral nation, we're not going to have a republic. And I think the two go together. But I also really want to emphasize the fact that I'm not totally pessimistic that we can't do it. There are things going on out there, educationally. I think, on economic policies, they're out there. They're not at the Federal Reserve, and they're not in the Congress. And I was in Congress a good many years, and I never, well, I wouldn't say never, but there were very, very few who ever heard of Austrian free market economics, and never dreamed that a person should talk about the Federal Reserve. So it's not there. We're a consequence of the brainwashing that has gone on with our universities for over 100 years. And to reverse that can only be done by private organizations having putting the information out there that they're willing to look at. And that is the basis of what I try to do. And I try to continue to my education so that I can make it. Mises once used the word palatable. There are people who write detailed, fancy, esoteric articles on economics and whatever, but he said there's also people that would like to take those ideas and make them palatable to the average person. And since I'm an average person, I'm entitled to make that effort. But Nicole, I think I'm going to have to go in a couple minutes.
Sure.
I have
No,
another
this
interview.
is perfect. It's been an hour and an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and keeping it going. Every time I talk to you, I feel more hopeful and more capable.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Well, good. Nice being with you.
Okay, take care.